Imagine digging into the dry, sun-baked earth of modern-day Iraq and pulling out a shard of clay that shatters everything you think you know about the Bible. You brush off the dust, you decipher the wedge-shaped marks, and you realize you are reading the story of Noah's Ark. You're reading the story of Adam and Eve. You're reading about the Tower of Babel. But here is the problem. This clay tablet isn't from the Bible. It was written 1,000 years before the first word of Genesis was ever put to scroll. For centuries, we have viewed the biblical narratives as isolated, singular revelations. But the ground beneath our feet tells a different story. It tells us that the Anunnaki, the ancient gods of Mesopotamia, might be the invisible ink written between the lines of the scriptures. Did ancient scribes copy these pagan myths? Or is there something much more complex and much more human going on? Today, we are not looking at the sky for aliens. We are looking at the text. We are going back to the cradle of civilization to find out if the God of Genesis is standing on the shoulders of the Anunnaki. To understand this, we have to strip away the YouTube conspiracy theories. Forget the History Channel, late-night specials about planet Nibiru and gold mining aliens. If we want the truth, we have to look at what the Sumerians actually wrote. The word Anunnaki isn't code for extraterrestrials. In the ancient Sumerian language, it translates roughly to princely offspring, or those of royal blood. These were the elite, the aristocracy of the heavens. They were the children of An, the sky god, and Ki, the earth goddess. They weren't just floating around playing harps. They were the cosmic heavyweights responsible for the machinery of the universe. In the Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest texts we have, the Anunnaki, are there at the very beginning. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, they are the terrifying judges of the underworld. These deities dominated the cultural imagination of the Near East for millennia. And it is impossible, physically and culturally impossible, that the writers of the Bible didn't know who they were. The question isn't whether they knew. The question is what they did with that knowledge. Let's look at the creation of humanity. If you grew up going to Sunday school, you know the scene. God forms a man from the dust of the ground and breathes the breath of life into his nostrils. It is intimate, it is peaceful, it is purposeful. But let's rewind the tape to 1700 BCE, to the old Babylonian period. There's a text called the Atrahasis Epic. In this story, the universe is run by a two-tier system of gods. You have the Anunnaki, the upper management, and the Igigi, the working-class gods. The Igigi are miserable. They are digging the canals, they are dredging the rivers, they are doing the back-breaking labor of maintaining the earth, and eventually they snap. They burn their tools and surround the palace of the high god Enlil. It is a divine labor strike. So, the wise god Enki proposes a solution. He says, let's create a substitute. Let's make a being that can carry the yoke of labor so the gods can rest. But notice the recipe. They don't just use dust. They take a god named Wee-Ilu. They slaughter him. They take his flesh and his blood, mix it with clay, and spit on it. From this bloody, violent mixture, humanity is born. The parallel is undeniable. In both stories, we are made of earth. In Genesis, it's dust. In Atrahasis, it's clay. In both stories, there is a divine spark. In Genesis, it's the breath of God. In Atrahasis, it is the literal blood of a god. But look at the difference in intent. It changes everything. In the Mesopotamian view, you are a slave. You were created because the gods were tired of working. Your existence is a solution to a logistical problem. The biblical authors take that same framework, clay and divine essence, and they flip the script. They rewrite the narrative to say, no, you are not a slave. you are a steward. You weren't made from the blood of a murdered God. You were made by the breath of a loving one. It's the same story structure, weaponized to tell a completely different truth. And then there is the flood. This is the smoking gun of comparative mythology. Everyone knows Noah, the ark, the animals, the rain, the olive branch, but buried in the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, archaeologists found the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And when they translated it in the 19th century, it caused a scandal. The story features a man named Utnapishtim. The gods decide to wipe out humanity not because they are sinful, but because they are noisy. We are too loud, and the high god Enlil can't sleep, so he decides to drown everyone. But the god Ea whispers a warning to Utnapishtim through a reed wall. He tells him to tear down his house and build a boat. He gives him the exact dimensions. He tells him to seal it with bitumen. Utnapishtim loads it with his family, the craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. The storm comes, and it is so terrifying that even the gods panic. They retreat to the highest heavens and cower like dogs. After 6 days and 7 nights, the storm breaks. The boat grounds on a mountain. Utnapishtim sends out a dove. It comes back. He sends out a swallow. It comes back. He sends out a raven. The raven eats, it circles, and it does not return. Utnapishtim steps out and offers a sacrifice. The text says, "The gods smelled the sweet savor, and they gathered like flies around the offering." The details match Genesis almost beat for beat. The warning, the boat, the pitch, the mountain landing, the birds, the dove, and the raven, the sacrifice at the end. It is obvious that these are the same event viewed through 2 different lenses. The biblical writers didn't just invent the flood story, they inherited it. But again, watch the twist. In Mesopotamia, the flood is a tantrum. The gods are petty, frightened, and hungry. In Genesis, the flood is a moral reset button. It is a judgment on corruption. Noah isn't saved because a trickster god leaked a secret. He is saved because he is righteous. The Bible takes a terrifying cultural memory of destruction and reframes it into a story about justice and covenant. Now, things get stranger. We have to talk about the giants. Genesis chapter 6 is one of those passages that makes you stop and reread it to make sure you aren't hallucinating. It says, "The sons of God saw the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they took them as wives. The offspring of this forbidden union were the Nephilim, the heroes of old, the men of renown." This feels like it belongs in a Greek myth, not the Bible. Who are these sons of God? Popular culture loves to link them to the Anunnaki, suggesting ancient astronauts came down and interbred with humans. And while the word Anunnaki isn't in the Hebrew text, the idea certainly is. In Sumerian tradition, there were the Apkallu, 7 wise demigods sent by Enki to civilize humanity. But there were later traditions where these beings overstepped their bounds, angering the gods. The biblical phrase, sons of God, Bene Ha-Elohim, refers to a divine council, a heavenly entourage. In the ancient world, every high god had a council. In Babylon, it was the Anunnaki surrounding Marduk. The biblical authors were writing in a world where the boundary between heaven and earth was porous. By including this story of the Nephilim, they are acknowledging this shared ancient belief that cosmic order can be breached. It sets the stage for the flood, showing that the world wasn't just filled with bad people, it was filled with cosmic pollution. It was a world where the divine and the human had mixed in a way that was never intended. This brings us to the nature of God himself. We tend to think of the Bible as strictly monotheistic from page 1. But if you look closely at the Hebrew, you see the fingerprints of a transition. Psalm 82 portrays God standing in the great assembly, judging among the gods. This is a divine council scene, straight out of a Canaanite or Mesopotamian playbook. In those cultures, the high god El or Anu would preside over the meeting. The biblical writers paint Yahweh as the one who stands up in that council and fires everyone else. He takes over the job. He absorbs the roles of the other deities. Consider the personality of Yahweh in the early texts. He is a storm god. He marches out from the desert. He has a voice like thunder. In the Mesopotamian flood story, it is Enlil who sends the storm. Enlil is the lord of the wind, often portrayed as harsh and authoritarian. When the Bible describes Yahweh as a man of war, or describes his wrath, it is echoing the language used for Enlil. This isn't to say Yahweh is Enlil. It's to say that the biblical writers were using the most powerful language they had available to describe their God. They were claiming that every power attributed to Enlil, the storm, the wind, the judgment, actually belonged to Yahweh. Finally, we arrive at the Tower of Babel. Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. We usually read this as a metaphor for pride, but in 3000 BCE, this wasn't a metaphor, it was architecture. The landscape of Sumer was dotted with ziggurats, massive stepped pyramids made of baked brick and bitumen. They were literally designed to be stairways for the gods to descend to earth. The most famous one, the Anunnaki in Babylon, was known as the House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. The story in Genesis 11 is a direct satire of this Babylonian technology. The text specifies baked brick and tar for mortar. These are the specific engineering materials of Mesopotamia. The name Babel itself is a pun. In Akkadian, Bab Ili means gate of the gods. It sounds prestigious, it sounds holy, but the Hebrew scribes twist it. They connect it to the Hebrew word balal, which means confusion. They take the greatest architectural achievement of their oppressors, the giant ziggurat that was supposed to be a gate to the divine, and they turn it into a monument to human stupidity and divine judgment. It is a political cartoon written in theology. It says, you think you can build your way up to God with your bricks and your tar? God doesn't need a stairway. He needs to come down just to see your tiny little tower. So, where does this leave us? When we unveil these connections, we aren't finding plagiarism. We are finding a polemic. The biblical authors were not living in a vacuum. They were surrounded by the towering ziggurats, the epic poems, and the terrifying gods of the superpowers next door. They didn't ignore these stories. They confronted them. They took the raw materials of their culture, the clay, the flood, the giants, the towers, and they recast them. They told the world that humanity is not a slave labor force for the Anunnaki, but the image bearers of the one true God. They told the world that the flood wasn't a mistake, but a judgment. They took the Anunnaki's world and turned it upside down. The similarities don't weaken the Bible. They show us exactly what it was fighting against. It's a debate that has been raging for 3,000 years, etched in clay and ink, asking the ultimate question, who are we, and who or what is watching us from the heavens?